So we'll start with, we'll continue with the infections, and today we're going to discuss the viral infections. Last class we discussed the fungal and the bacterial, and today we're going to discuss the viral infections. And so the learning objectives from here is to know the viruses which are relevant to us as dentists, to describe the pathogenesis, clinical features, histopathology and treatment of herpes simplex virus 1 and 2, and measles, and how to diagnose and treat these viral infections. So two of them we're going to study mainly, that is your herpes simplex and the measles virus. So the virus which are relevant to dentistry are all these viruses. Your herpes virus, that is 1, 2, varicella zoster, Epstein-Barr virus, and cytomegalovirus. I will be dealing only with HSV1 and HSV2. Epstein-Barr virus you've already studied under Kaposi sarcoma. Measles virus, which we're going to study again today. Then papilloma viruses, again you have dealt with it when you were studying the squamous papilloma under the benign tumors, Coxsackie virus, and mumps virus. Very medical related. I'm not going to discuss those two. If you're interested, you can go and check it. So herpes simplex virus causes an acute disease which is very infectious and contagious, and it spreads through direct contact or through fomites. Fomites means any articles which the person might have touched. Suppose you borrow a pen from someone who has herpes simplex, then it might be transferred through that pen. I'm just giving an example. Skin, mucous membrane, eyes, and central nervous system, all these areas are involved. And there are two types, HSV1 and HSV2, based upon which part of the body is affected and where the virus resides. I will tell you what is the meaning of that. So HSV1 affects the upper part of the body. So it affects the face, lips, oral cavity, which is of main interest to us, and the upper body skin. Whereas HSV2 affects the lower body. So it affects the skin of the lower body and your genitals. And there could be a cross infection because of the sexual habits. HSV2 can be, the oral infection can be contracted in that manner, or vice versa. And of course, we're only going to study HSV1 and not HSV2. So when I said the virus, it resides in a particular ganglion, let's see what it means. So whenever there is an initial herpes simplex virus infection, it doesn't really produce any clinical symptoms, okay? The virus will just penetrate the mucosal barrier without causing any visible lesions, okay? But then the virus will become neurotropic. What is the meaning of neurotropic? Is that through the peripheral nerves which are present near the lesion, it will go to the regional ganglion. You can say migrate to the regional ganglion, and it resides there in a latent form. I hope you know what is the meaning of latency and quiescence. Yeah, so it is basically, it is not active. The meaning is that it is not active. But whenever there is a trigger, suppose there is some sort of trigger or activation that results in migration back along the nerve axon to the epithelial surface, okay? And the trigger to cause these are the emotional stress, menstrual cycle in women, trauma, sunlight, and immune suppression in general. So all this can act as a trigger. So, if you have a patient who has come to you who's dealing with a lot of stress, or maybe they have some kind of immune disorder, then and if they have lesions which are in line with herpes, then you must keep that as your differential diagnosis. So I hope you understood. So initial infection, the virus will just penetrate the mucosal surface, and then it goes along the peripheral nerve to the regional ganglion. In case of herpes simplex virus 1, it's the trigeminal ganglion because it's all your oral structures. And for HSV2, it is the lumbosacral ganglion. It's very, very important This is the lower part of the body, resides in lumbosacral. HSV1 affects the upper part of the body and resides in the trigeminal ganglion. So until it is reactivated, the factors which reactivate it is given here, listed. So let's look at the lesions itself. So primary herpetic gingivostomatitis, very, very, very common in children, especially the preschool children. So this is something which is very common in the preschool children, and it is very contagious. So if one child gets it, then the whole class and the whole school gets it. It is that contagious, and it is characterized by vesicles. What is a vesicle? So it is a fluid-filled lesion, okay? Vesicles are like elevated lesions which are fluid-filled, okay? So these will rupture, forming ulcers. So this fluid-filled vesicles will rupture to leave behind ulcerative area. It can occur on any surface intraorally and is associated with systemic symptoms like fever and malaise. It is self-limiting, and usually after 7 to 10 days, it heals without scar formation. This is very important to differentiate it from other lesions. So remember that 7 to 10 days without any scar formation. So these are all, actually, they're all ruptured already. So these are all the ruptured lesion to leave behind ulcerative areas. And as you can see, this is a small child. Actually, this is an older person, but it's very common in the preschool children. So that was the primary herpetic gingivostomatitis. And secondary lesion is called as recurrent herpes simplex, because it comes back in the later stages, and it occurs in the adults mainly. And this I've already told you, that whenever there is a trigger, the virus which was latent in the regional ganglion will become reactivated and will come back through the axon of the nerve and recreate the lesion. And it basically affects all the areas which are supplied by the trigeminal nerve. There is a burning sensation, tingling sensation, swelling, and soreness within that area which is affected by the lesion, and heals without scarring again within 1 to 2 weeks. So the healing without scarring is similar for both primary and secondary. The duration is 7 to 10 days for primary and 1 to 2 weeks for secondary. See, this is how you should study. If you just keep on studying slide by side, line by line, you will never remember it. You have to always compare it with the counterparts, or maybe something contrast, so that you can remember, oh, this is this and that is that, okay? So that's how you remember things. And in secondary, there are two types, cold sore, and there's another one which is activated by the heat. So reactivation by the cold is called as the cold sore. It's very easy to remember. And reactivation by exposure to the sunlight is called as the fever blisters. So you might have seen this either happening to you or to anyone in your family. Whenever they have very, very high fever, there will be a breakout, especially around the lip area. Even the cold sore, it is very, very common sight in people. So you do see these things in people around you, or even yourself. So whenever it affects the vermilion border, you know what is the vermilion border? It is the area which divides your skin part of the face from the labial mucosa. That's the vermilion border, because it's red in color. So the word vermilion is used. And in such scenario, it is called as herpes labialis. And intraorally, it is restricted to two areas, that is hard palate and gingiva. So when I was talking about vesicles, this is what I meant. So these are all, you can see that it's filled with fluid and they're elevated areas, right? So whenever you see it around the vermilion zone, this is the vermilion zone, border between the skin and the labial mucosa, where it begins. So it usually appears around this area, circumoral. Okay, so this is a very common site on top of the upper lip, and it can even occur on the lip itself, like you see here. Okay, and over here you see this lesion. So these can also rupture. You can see here it's already ruptured. Here it's rupture, it's in the verge of rupturing. So even these will leave behind ulcerations. So when it occurs on the lip, around the lip, it's called herpes labialis. Please remember, the most important lesion for us as dentists, it's not written here, but it will come as a question for sure. Of course, the most important way you can identify is by doing a virus culture. DNA in situ hybridization is very easy to identify the specific virus. So treatment is you should the timing is very crucial here, so you should start as early as possible. All these are antiviral drugs. I hope you know acyclovir and penciclovir, very very important viral antiviral drugs. Supportive therapy, a lot of fluids. Any viral infection, these are the things which you do. You take a lot of rest, the body becomes dehydrated, so you drink a lot of fluids. If there is any fever associated, you give antipyretic, that is your acetaminophen or any of those. Oral lavages, so to relieve that burning sensation and the pain which is associated with it. And for pain, you give analgesic as well. So the second viral lesion is measles. There are several other names for it. Rubeola is something you might want to remember, but it is no more a common occurrence because of the advent of a vaccine called MMR. But very weird that the developed countries stopped giving this vaccination for their kids because it is no more there. So some of the children and even adults do get affected by measles once in a while. So this is a very interesting thing. When the coronavirus outbreak happened, there were many studies which was done, and they found out that there is a particular vaccine called BCG, which they give within, I think, the first week after the baby is born. And that is done only in the developing countries. In the developed countries, in the Western world especially, they don't give this vaccination. And they somehow found out that people who are vaccinated with BCG were somehow immune to coronavirus. So you don't know how these. Of course, there are a lot of research done, and we do know how it works. But there could be some kind of cross immunity. You might have immunity for those bacteria, and as well as some cross immunity for other organisms. So that's how it works. So MMR vaccine given in some countries. So because of that, there is a drop in the incidence of measles. That's what you should know. But we still need to know, because like I said, in the developed countries, they don't give this vaccine. So you do see in such countries. So there is fever, malaise, and cough associated with it. These are the important and the severe symptoms: conjunctivitis, photophobia, and lacrimation. So Koplik spots are characteristic lesions which we see in the measles, as you see here, and it is seen on the body as well, but it usually seen in the oral cavity 1 or 2 days before the skin rashes. Okay, so that's why dentists have a very important role in identifying this, even during those prodromal symptoms, they're called as. So before the actual symptoms set in, there are some prodromal symptoms. So this is one of them. So it is irregular shaped macules, as you can see here, and there is a red margin which is surrounding these macules, which could be bluish white in color in the center. Okay. This usually disappears once the skin rashes develop. That is another feature which you can correlate and decide about your diagnosis. The complications are encephalitis and thrombocytopenic purpura. I hope you know what is the meaning of thrombocytopenic purpura related to your platelet aggregation. And secondary infection, which can result in otitis media, which could be a severe symptom for the patient. And histopathologically, very classic Warthin-Finkelday giant cells. I've already described to you what is a giant cell repeatedly. So instead of having one nucleus in the cell, these cells will have several nucleus. Okay, that's why it's called multinucleated, and they're big in size. That's why it's called as giant cell. Okay, so these are nothing but the macrophages, and they're called as Warthin-Finkelday giant cells.